Hello, this is Chef John from foodwishes.com with fresh tomato curry. That's right, you can only eat so many tomato salads and BLTs. And when I decide I want to cook some sweet vine-ripened summer tomatoes instead of eating them in their raw state, this simple, beautiful, and amazing curry sauce is one of my favorite things to do. And to get started, we will prep and season whatever protein we're going to enjoy our sauce with, which for me are going to be these freakishly thin pork chops. But for you, this could be chicken breast or beef or lamb or shrimp or a piece of fish. And before I season, I'm going to snip. Okay, a great trick when you're doing thin pork chops is to go around with some scissors, making 4 or 5 cuts around the edge, which are going to prevent these from curling up when we brown them, which is kind of a big deal, especially with pork chops this thin. And yes, if your pork chops are thicker, just use a knife. But as my dad would have said, these were thin enough to read the newspaper through, so the scissors do the trick nicely. And that's it. Once we have those snipped, we'll go ahead and season them up with a mixture of kosher salt, freshly ground black pepper, and probably a shake of cayenne, which I did pre-mix to save time. And of course, you might adjust these seasonings depending on what protein you choose. But the point is, we definitely want to season them up somehow before we head to the stove to sear them up, which we will do in this skillet in a little bit of oil or clarified butter set over high heat. And since these chops were so ridiculously thin, I'm only going to brown these for about 1.5 minutes per side. And then, as you'll see, we'll finish off the cooking in the hot curry sauce. And because we did snip around the outside of the pork chop, these are staying nice and flat and not curling up. Right, besides looking weird, curled up meat does not brown well. So if you use thin chops, don't forget the trick. And if you're keeping score at home, I actually used avocado oil, which is a great high heat oil to brown in. But clarified butter, or ghee, which is the Indian version of that, would be a great choice here. But I don't know, I guess I wanted to keep the sauce vegan, since that's never not amusing to serve pork in. But regardless of what we use, once our protein's browned, we will pull it out of the pan, and we'll reduce our heat to medium, and we will start building our fresh tomato curry sauce. And that starts with some diced onions, along with the rest of our aromatics, as they are referred to in the business. And that will be some freshly minced ginger, some finely diced jalapeno, and some sliced garlic. And what we'll do after we add a nice pinch of salt is cook this stirring for a few minutes until those onions just start to soften and turn translucent, and that oil and fat in the pan have been infused with these incredible flavors. And once we feel like that's happened, we'll go ahead and spice this up fairly simply with some garam masala, which is an Indian spice blend that's fairly easy to find. We will also do a little bit of turmeric, as well as some ground cumin. And what we'll do is stir all that together and cook it for about 1 minute. To, as I like to say, wake up the spices. Okay, as far as sauce best practices go, anytime we can cook our spices a little bit in the fat, before we add our wet ingredients, that is almost always an advantage, and will probably produce something more flavorful. So when we can, please do. And that's it, we can now transfer in the star of the show, a gorgeous array of cut-up fresh summer tomatoes, which, not to brag, but I grew myself. And what you're seeing is some sun gold, some Roma, and some Cherokee purple. And then to our tomatoes, we will add one sort of secret ingredient, which will be a little bit of tamarind paste, although this is really more of a sauce. And tamarind is a little bit sweet and very, very sour, which makes it a perfect pairing with the sweetness of the tomatoes. And once we have all this mixed together, what we'll do is let this cook on medium, stirring occasionally, until our tomatoes break down and liquefy, and get soft enough so we can pass them through a mesh strainer. And because that's probably going to take about 10 minutes of simmering, we should probably add a nice splash of cold fresh water so things don't thicken up too much. And I guess part of that will depend on how juicy your tomatoes were. But anyway, these kind of adjustments are up to you. I mean, you are, after all, the chef of your curry. But whether you add some water or not, like I said, we will cook this stirring until our tomatoes completely collapse and hopefully look something like this. And once they do, we'll pull that off the heat and carefully pass that through a mesh strainer, which is going to allow all the goodness to pass through, while catching all the tomato seeds and tomato skins and fibrous pieces of ginger. And what you're left with is one of the most delicious, most beautiful, most versatile tomato sauces you will ever enjoy. And I almost said this step is optional, since you can, I guess, blend this until it's smooth. But I really do think it's much nicer if we remove all the harsh bits And this entire step only takes a couple minutes. So if you have a strainer, I must insist. And that's it. One strain will transfer that back into our pan, along with our reserved brown meat. And we will also add, of course, any and all accumulated juices. Or if you throw those away, you officially don't know how to cook. And what we'll do is gently bring this back to a simmer on medium, and we'll give that meat a toss in the sauce. And once this does start to gently simmer, we can also baste it with a spoon. And then as far as how to finish this goes, because I was using such thin pieces of meat, I'm only going to let it simmer for a couple minutes until it's just barely cooked through. But if you're using something like chicken breast, it's going to take longer. And if you happen to use a tougher cut like a lamb shoulder steak, you might have to let this simmer for an hour or more until it's tender. But the process is the same. We will simply cook whatever we're cooking until it's exactly how we want. And if that is going to take a long time, we'll need to add some more water or broth to the pan, just to maintain that sauce consistency we want. So you'll have to observe and adjust. Speaking of which, make sure at some point you taste the sauce and adjust if need be, which I did with some more salt and a few shakes of cayenne. And that's it. Once we're happy with everything, we'll go ahead and serve up. And of course, in real life, we'll want to serve this with lots of rice or naan to soak up all this fantastic sauce. Right? Tragically, I didn't have any ready when I served this, but I did shortly thereafter, and it was magnificent. And once I did have that served up, I moved on to one of my favorite parts of cooking, the garnishing. And for this, I decided to go with a small dollop of yogurt on each. And then I topped that with some thinly sliced red onions, followed by some roasted cashews, which are kind of rich and sweet, which I thought would pair perfectly with our sauce. And then last but not least, I finished up with a scattering of freshly picked cilantro leaves. And that's it, my fresh tomato curry chops were ready to enjoy. And while this sauce really was tremendous with the pork chops, as I've already mentioned, it will be equally effective no matter what you choose to pair it with. Alright, I would have a real problem trying to think of things this wouldn't be good with. In fact, it's so good you don't even have to have anything. You can simply make this sauce and just eat it with rice or naan bread. And if you paired that with a nice green salad, that might actually be the best way to go. Oh, and this will also work beautifully tossed with some pasta. Oh yeah, some fresh tomato curry spaghetti might be just the thing you're craving. But the point is, this is amazing no matter what's on the end of your fork. And if you're looking for a great way to use up some fresh summer tomatoes in their cooked form, I cannot think of a better choice than this sauce, which is why I really do hope you give this a try soon. So please follow the links below for the ingredient amounts, a printable written recipe, and much more info as usual. And as always, enjoy.